Hi, this is a recording for NSG3001, test number 2, study guide, chapters 5, 6, 8, 16, and 24. There's a total of 60 questions total on this exam. The first question is examples of statutes enacted by state legislature and common judicial decisions and federal legislature. Nurse Practice Acts are an example of statutes enacted by state legislatures to regulate the practice of nursing. Common laws are based on judicial decisions or case law precedent. Remember, I said an example of a judicial decision that God's healthcare practice is Roe versus Wade, but not the Nurse Practice Act. An example of a federal statute that affects healthcare practice is the American with Disabilities Act, but not the Nurse Practice Act. The Nurse Practice Act is a state law, not a federal Senate bill. Okay. What is the Nurse Practice Act and how does it function? Nurse Practice Acts permit the State Board of Nursing basically to set rules, regulations, and guidelines that specifically define the standard of care in nursing practice. An example is the guidelines that define patient abandonment. The State Department of Health, the Joint Commission, and the National League for Nursing do not set the legal rules and regulations for patient abandonment. An example of that would be through the Nurse Practice Act. The Nurse Practice Act actually permits the State Board of Nursing to set rules and regulation and guidelines. What are the duties of the State Board of Nursing? Basically, the State Board of Nursing are the ones that set rules, regulation, and guidelines. And those are specifically defined whatever the standard of care is within the nursing practice. Know the difference between assault, battery, misdemeanor, felony, intentional, and unintentional torts. We did go over all of these. We discussed how assault is an intentional threat toward another person that gives the person a reasonable fear of harmful contact. So assault doesn't necessarily have to mean that there's actual contact that occurs. An example of an assault in nursing practice is to threaten to restrain a patient for an x-ray procedure when the patient has refused consent. Battery is what we consider an intentional, offensive touching without consent or lawful justification. Negligence is an unintentional tort. And a felony is what one would call is a serious offense that results in significant harm to another person or society in general, like misusing controlled substances, for instance. You can reference a lot of these on pages 63 and 64 when you get to speaking about Nurse Practice Acts or like the definitions of assault and whether or not something is intentional or unintentional torts. Okay. Know the proper entries to put in a chart as well as examples of improper entries. In this particular case, I would be discussing like if you was particularly remember when we were discussing about incidents or what they would call occurrence reports and that type of things. Remember when we was discussing in lecture, I specifically said that you document in the patient's charts all things that happen, but you do it objectively. You detail all the events, any statements that the patient makes, any of that type of thing at the time of the event. So you always assess the patient thoroughly and then contact the healthcare provider to examine him or her. Well, that is okay for you to chart or to document in your nursing notes. But what is not something that you should document in the nursing notes would specifically be the fact that you made out an occurrence or incident reports. It kind of depends on where you are. Exactly. What? Let me see. Okay. Know about proper entries to put in a chart as well as improper entries. We talked about that. Be able to discuss the purpose of the Good Samaritan law. We already talked about that in class, but I'll repeat. The Good Samaritan law, which protects the nurse because for instance, if a nurse is doing something that's within that nurse's scope of practice, basically it provides the nurse like immunity to when they do something reasonable in order to try to save a person's life. If the nurse, for instance, provides or performs a procedure for which like he or she has no training, the nurse will be liable for any injury resulting from that act. Therefore, it's really, really important for the nurse to provide only the care that is consistent with their level of expertise. The insurance policies, the state boards of nursing, and the Institute of Medicine do not provide protection to the nurse under the Good Samaritan law. So those type of things wouldn't basically be considered protection. So you can reference that on page 66. Know the difference between malpractice and negligence. We discussed in class about the difference between somebody being negligent and just straight up malpractice. Like for instance, you know that negligence is conduct that falls below the generally accepted standard of care of a reasonably prudent person. So there are certain things that are required for a person to do with when they're like working within you know, their scope. And if for instance you don't do that, and if it may not even result, but there may be a potential for it to result in some type of injury, well then that would be considered negligence. Now malpractice goes a little deeper. Malpractice is something like, for instance, when you're doing something that you're just really truly not supposed to be doing because it's totally out of your scope of practice. Like somebody posing to be a nurse and they're really not a nurse, or someone posing to be maybe even a nurse practitioner and they're RN, but they're doing things that may be above their scope of care because they may not be trained, sufficiently, or whatever, or haven't gotten licensed in that role yet. So those are basically the differences. No, by law, upon patient admission, requirements of information that you need to provide to the client. Remember, we talked about things such as the patient's Bill of Rights. We talked about asking whether or not the individual has a will, and if they don't have a will, it's a good idea for you to provide one for them. Like for instance, like notification of how to go about obtaining a will and explain it to them. Also, as far as like you doing or giving someone informed consent, for instance, they do need to have consent if the physician is preparing to give them some type of procedure. So it's very, very important that you also give them, I said will, which is the same thing as like advance directives. So you are required as a nurse to give them that information when they come into the unit or wherever you're working. And also when you document, that is like the most important thing that can be done, because that is one of the best things to do to like protect yourself and protect other people involved with whatever, because there are a lot of times when things may happen and you may have to, so writing in the nursing notes, documenting what's going on, all of that type of thing is very, very important if you want to protect your license as well. Just know about the order as far as contacting individuals when it comes to for instance, let's say you may want to ask somebody to give permission for organ donation or something like that. Know what order it is that one should notify somebody. Know about the guidelines as far as emancipation, like of a minor or something like that. But I want to tell you, like when you're considering organ or tissue donations, I can tell you the order that for consent is first spouse. After spouse, the second is adult son or daughter. Adult son or daughter. So, spouse, adult son or daughter, then the parent of the individual. So a lot of people may think that the parent would probably supersede the son or daughter, but they actually don't. So the spouse, the son or daughter, the parent, then the brother or sister that's an adult, the grandparent, and then the guardian, in that exact order. That's the order when you talk in terms of providing care and that type of thing. for an adult, that's, or trying to get some type of consent. Let me see. Be able to find and give examples of nurse autonomy, justice, fidelity, non-malfeasance. Oh, I said justice. And beneficence. Okay. So, the first one that we asked about was autonomy. And basically, autonomy refers to independence and self-determination. So, autonomy refers to independence and self-determination. So, any role within that would be what one would consider autonomy. Justice is basically principles of fairness. And most of these definitions you could usually find anywhere between pages 77 to about 79 in your book. Okay, so after justice, which I said that's just being fair, the next would be like fidelity. And fidelity refers to the agreement to keep promises, and it's based on the virtue of caring. So fidelity means that just, that if you had somebody that was, for instance, I don't know, well, for instance, a nurse, when you think about fidelity, you think that it's her role to try to promote health. So doing things, and that's the promise that we give, when we caring for other people. Non-malfeasance is basically an agreement fundamentally to just do no harm. What else? I said justice. I already gave you that. I said being and beneficence. Oh, beneficence basically it just guides whatever decisions in which you're trying to basically benefit a patient well-being or even their dignity. So within that, when I showed you the slides, make sure that if I have maybe 3 or 4 questions on the test with examples, you should be able to pick out those examples of all those terminologies. Be able to define an example of bioethics, social networking, confidentiality, values and culture, fairness, advocacy, and utilitarianism. So all of those are, once again, some definitions of things that you need to know about. So, for instance, if you're talking about bioethics, just know that that basically just represents a particular branch of being ethical, which is the study of ethics within the field of healthcare. We already discussed about how what the effects of social networking, which is basically online communication, and just being careful when you're having or you're using consideration when you're using that type of thing. Confidentiality, when you're keeping information, basically, you're not delivering information just to anyone. And we talked about value being a personal belief that a person has, and everybody knows how values and beliefs can have a profound effect as far as what a person values or believes within their culture. We already talked about fairness. We already talked about advocating, which basically means that you're speaking up for an individual, especially when there's someone that can't speak for themselves. Also, utilitarianism means is that you're trying to basically do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. What organization developed the code of ethics? And remember, the ANA and the ICN are the ones set the principles of behavior for the nurses to embrace. We discussed that. Let me see. Remember, I gave you the list, and I told you about the steps of, like working through an ethical dilemma. And we even discussed how the steps of working through an ethical dilemma was a lot like the nursing process. So, like step one, you're going to say, is this a problem? Like, is this an ethical dilemma? Step two, you're going to gather all the relevant information in the case. Three, you're going to examine and determine how your own values and opinions about the issues fit in, because you have to always think about being fair in most situations. Four, you're going to state the problem. Five, you're going to consider possible courses of action. Six, you're going to negotiate the outcome. And then seven, you're going to basically evaluate the action that you took. So those are the 7 basic steps to process an ethical dilemma. And you should pretty much know that. Know the difference between intuition and critical thinking. Well, intuition is kind of like an inner sense or a gut feeling that something is so. Critical thinking, though, is like recognizing that an issue exists, analyzing the information, going through those different steps that you take, analyzing information related to whatever the issue is, evaluating that information, and then drawing a conclusion. And a lot of time what happens is a person reflects, they'll look back and they'll say, back, I remember the last time, but based on this or whatever, where you recall a situation, and and then as a result you really uh discover whatever the purpose or the meaning was of that situation, and that may aid you in critical thinking. So just knowing that intuition is really more or less a gut feeling. Like I was telling you guys about that guy that time that I just had this feeling, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when I found out, the woman told me that he was the type of individual that he was, that wasn't exactly a credible individual. I was kind of like, I had that intuition. But I never said anything because it wasn't based on any type of fact, or there was nothing for me to reflect about, or nothing for me to draw up on. Let me see. Know the stages of critical thinking. Remember when I showed you guys, and it's real hard because I just basically want you to just be aware that these like researchers, like if you see the name, because I'm not real good at I guess basically pronouncing their name. You gotta excuse my phone beeping. So I'll try to basically pronounce it. Katoko, Yahiro, and Saylor's model. That's the stages of critical thinking. There are basically 3 levels of critical thinking. Like there's the basic level, the complex level, and then there's what they consider commitment, which is the 3rd level. So I could tell you briefly what happens in each level. At the basic level of critical thinking, a learner trusts that experts have the right answers for every problem. And the thinking is concrete, and it's really based on a set of rules or principles. So basically that's how we kind of bring it to you at the beginning of nursing school, or while you in nursing school. We kind of feed you the way you should be talking and helping you think through how you should be thinking. And then you have what you call complex critical thinkers begin to basically separate themselves from the experts. So that's when you get to the point where you're working on trying to become an expert. You may be a novice, but at the same time, you don't need people to just feed you information. So you become more complex. You learn to synthesize knowledge, basically. So make it count for something. So you develop a new thought or idea, and basically that grows based on your experience and knowledge over time. And then the 3rd level of critical thinking is commitment. So at the 3rd level of critical thinking, you anticipate the need to make choices basically without the assistance from any other people. So that is the models of care. Then you have know the purpose of a concept map. And I kind of briefly graze through that a little bit for you. And when I was telling you that it was doing basically a concept map is where you basically, it's like a visual, because it has like blocks. It's a visual representation of meaningful relationships between various concepts. So it's a visual representation. You can look on page 118 of your book. So it has patient problems or nursing diagnosis and intervention. And what this does is it forms like propositions. So like concept maps are kind of like visual road maps. And they highlight the meanings of these relationships. So the primary purpose is to synthesize any relevant data about a patient, such as assessment data, nursing diagnosis, health needs, nursing interventions, and evaluation measures. So you're just trying to like connect all the dots, together, basically. And it's leading to this one thing or one problem. Blood pressure 188 over 102, blurred vision, you know what I'm saying, kidney failure, and it might all move towards the fact that a person has high blood pressure. And basically, as far as a nursing diagnosis for that, it would be like, and then so for each one of them things, then you would connect the relationship of why you doing this, why you doing that, why, related to those. So that's how a lot of times I tend to not do well with concept maps because I guess I think of probably a different way, but I do know and realize that a lot of students tend to find them very helpful. And they're supposed to be like the wave, so maybe I'm not the wave of the future. We already know about the steps of the nursing process, and basically what I need you to be able to do is when you're going through the nursing process, I want you to be able to know the order of it, okay, and know what, when you implement something, or when you see a certain situation, what step would you implement? What step, what would you do, and how, like, I want you to be able to tell me is, when would you answer a question or have a hypothesis, for instance? When would you evaluate? When would you identify the problem? When would you evaluate? So if you're using what they consider to be like the scientific method, how would you go about that? You can reference your page 110, and I want you to be able to know what forming the question or hypothesis is, answering the question or hypothesis, and just thinking through the question like, okay, I'm already doing this. I'm already doing, like when you're working through something, how are you answering? Or are you answering the question? Or are you implementing a process? Or are you identifying a problem? What are you doing if a person gives you a scenario? And so you may need to work on that. And just think it through. And what I really want you to do is just let it make like perfect sense to you. Okay, so then we basically got through that portion, And what I'm going to pull off of is just some basic examination techniques and a lot of things that we've learned. I want you guys to know based on that, I guess, let's start with some of the physical exam stuff. But with the physical exam stuff, this is some things that we've already kind of went over. For instance, when you palpate a person, okay, and you're using, you know, the tip of your fingers and you palpating and, you know, pushing down a little bit on a person with your fingers. You got to know that you got to palpate the tender areas or the areas that they say last. And usually palpation occurs right after inspection. So right after you look at it, then you'll palpate. Okay? But there's a difference in the order when you, for instance, are doing the abdomen. So, like for instance, look on page 317 and know that, for instance, when it has to do with the abdomen, palpation primarily occurs, well, it does, after you auscultate, which means you're listening. And the reason why is because when you're dealing with the abdomen, you don't want to stir nothing up. You don't want to stir no bowel sounds up. You don't want to stir nothing up. So basically auscultation is like, you know that you're going to inspect first. You know that you're going to palpate. You know that you're going to percuss and auscultate. So basically, when you are auscultating, you're trying to listen for with your stethoscope for whatever sounds are produced by the body. But when you look at the order that you do each one of these things, when you are checking the stomach, always remember that you don't palpate before you listen. Okay? So never palpate before you listen. So generally a person would inspect first, right? You're always going to be inspecting and looking first. Then you might palpate, you might touch. Then you might auscultate. You see what I'm saying? And then you may percuss, which is the tapping. But the thing about it is that know that it's switched when you are checking the abdomen. Okay? All right. The next, and I can't say that enough. It says, why is the head to toe approach important when a person is receiving a physical exam? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I was stopped. Where was I? Oh, why is the head-to-toe approach, that's number 19, important when performing a physical exam? And basically, it's just because you want to do things in a methodical way. So, you'll make sure that you include all the body systems, and it helps you, like, have an order and anticipate each step. So, like, you will begin with the head and the neck, and then you will just progress methodically down the body, and then you will be able to include all body systems. And then there are going to be some examinations you're going to do where you may compare each side of the body for symmetry. So, it's best for you to do it that way. What type of lighting is best to examine African Americans? Basically, they just want you to use natural sunlight. Or if you use halogen, that's okay too. They claim that, like, if you have skin changes in a patient with darker skin, for instance, sunlight is the best choice. That's basic way. Okay. As far as, let me see, potential causes of dry skin, particularly in the elderly, that's basically because, well, it could be a lot of different things. Basically, older people, they have less collagen and less I guess cushion or elasticity, and then so as you get older, a lot of things tend to change on a person. They don't have as much elasticity. They don't have as much skin turgor, and that tends to be like a real major, like, big problem for them when it comes to dryness and that type of thing. They might be using some particular excessive amount of soap, for instance, for some reason, tend to dry older people out a lot more worse and stuff than it do people who are a lot younger. It tends to do that as well. So basically, turgor and the skin's elasticity being poor is a problem with older people, as well as they claim that them using too much soap when they're bathing is being a real bad problem for older people. Know about normal and abnormal expectation when assessing a person when, for instance, they're in a cast. Remember when I was telling you guys earlier about the circulation problems? So when you first assess a person and they're in a cast, you're going to assess the temperature. You don't want the temperature to be cold, because then that means that vascularly the blood is not flowing, so there's no circulation. Okay. That's probably the biggest way. And then you want to compare, like, how one particular hand might look in conjunction to another hand. One might be really, really swole to the point and cold, and then the other one is not that way. So it's very important that you assess the skin temperature with the back of your hand. So, let me see. Know the effect of hyperthyroids on the eyes. Hyperthyroidism. Remember I was telling you a person with Graves' disease, and they may have hyperthyroidism. Now, this is just things that I'm throwing in there so that y'all can start slowly knowing some of these different definitions and what they mean. So a lot of times when a person has hyperthyroidism, they have what they call EXOPHTHALMOS. And look on page 331, or either look on your PowerPoint, and that's bulging of the eyes. So a lot of times you can see somebody and they'll have that bulgy eyes that look like somebody scared them almost, and they jumping out of their skin. And that's really how a lot of them say that they feel. And that's associated with hyperthyroidism. So the thyroid is like a very dangerous gland. It could take you out in no time. I mean, so that's probably one of the most dangerous glands that you have in your body. Then, just for you to know, for instance, the word strabismus, strabismus, that means that a person's eyes are crossed. Strabismus. You can get that hereditarily, or it could be like a neuromuscular injury. Photophobia, you'll hear that, and that's sensitivity to light. Diplopia, that's double vision. You know, so those are some words. Then you have, I asked y'all about the droopy eyelids. The droopy eyelids is called ptosis. A lot of times you'll see that. It is caused by swelling, or basically impairment of the third cranial nerve. And I told you that I wanted everybody to work on knowing, what their cranial nerves are. Okay? And an abnormal drooping of the lid over the pupil, so you talk about the top eyelid, you have a little bit of what they call ptosis. That's drooping over the lid, and it'll be kind of drooping over the pupil when they have their eyes, it can come from edema, which is swelling, or impairment. You can have, but like sometimes you'll see an older person with ptosis, and that just comes from the fact that they got loss of elasticity. That basically, I guess it just kind of accompanies aging. As a person ages, they have more loss of elasticity, and a lot of things tend to droop, you know. And I'm going to give you some more terminology that you can put in your memory bank. Ectropion and entropion. That's when a person's eyelids turn out or turn in. So just pay attention to that. So I want y'all to work on these terminologies like strabismus and diplopia and exophthalmos and ptosis and ectropion and entropion, and you can look at it. You can look it up. You can look at it on page 331 through about 333, if I'm not mistaken. And we're going to start looking at things and examining things in lab, and it's going to be very nice. You're going to be very more aware of how things are supposed to look. Let me see. How does a healthy eardrum look? A healthy eardrum. So, if doing lab, I'm pretty sure that we'll show everyone how to actually use an otoscope and an ophthalmoscope and look into a person's ear. So you got the otoscope. When you, and this is like very, very, very important that you remember, when you look through someone's ear with an otoscope, the eardrum should be what they consider translucent, which means it looks like almost like you can look through it. It's going to be shiny, and it's supposed to be a pearly gray color. It's not supposed to have no tears or no breaks. If it's pink or if it's red, if it's bulging, well then that means that somebody might have some type of inflammation. So you're supposed to see a translucent, shiny, pearly gray thing. Every now and then you might see some cerumen, which is earwax, that might be so much that it may be blocking the tympanic membrane, and then that cause we have to do the warm water irrigation so we can remove the wax. But it should be shiny, pearly gray, and it should be almost like you about to look through it. So like if you see a white color, that means it got pus behind it, or that type of thing. So that's basically how it's supposed to look. Now I'm telling you, as I'm talking, I'm actually telling you as well, look how abnormal things are looking as well. Where do you auscultate the PMI? What is the PMI? So you listening, it's the point of what they consider maximal impulse when you're assessing the heart of a person. So when you got your stethoscope out, we say auscultate means you listening. You're the point of maximal impulse, which is PMI. The point where you could probably put your finger there and you might be able to feel it is the fifth intercostal space at the left mid-clavicular line. If it's an adult older than 7. And if it's a a child, it's usually left left to the mid-clavicular line, just a little left, and it's usually the fourth intercostal space. But I don't really trip off of kids too much. Remember I told you, but I know if I need to use it. So know that the PMI, and know that that stands for a point of maximal impulse, is palpable at the fifth intercostal space at the left mid-clavicular line in adults. Okay. And okay, so next we got be able to describe what drives a family's health, ideology as far as social context and health promotion. Basically, all I want you to know is the family's beliefs, their values, their cultures, and what their practices are influence how they promote their health behaviors. And I think we've discussed that like over and over again. Know the differences about within that, know about family diversity. I want you to be able to take it a little bit further. Remember I told you guys there are certain characteristics of families. There's diversity. There's no how can I explain it better? Know what family diversity is. That is the uniqueness of each family. Family resiliency is the ability of the family to cope with expected and unexpected stressors. Durability is the intra-familial system of support and structure that extend beyond the walls of the household. And then we know what the nuclear family is. That's the husband, wife, and children. So when you think about, like, okay, like if you say, Sally is, sick, and her husband is, I don't know, depending on her sister that lives across town to come and, I don't know, take her blood pressure and run and get her blood. They're showing durability because that family is extending outside of the household to take care of a particular need. Resiliency means basically that the family is just coping with any type of unexpected or expected. And diversity, I'm going to keep saying it until I feel like it's sinking in. It's just basically, a uniqueness of each family. Okay? That's what diversity means. Okay? Let me see. I already told you guys about social media as far as the policies and that type of thing. I must have forgot about that and threw it in there. because I wanted you guys to know that you need to know about social media. And we talked about nuclear, extended, blended, and alternate pattern relationships. I don't need to go over nuclear being the mother and father, extended being like people outside of your nuclear family, like your brother, your sister-in-law. It could be also be grandmother, other people. And then blended, like I said, couple get together and they bring their kids, and then this person might bring their kids or whatever. That's a blended family. And then alternate could be anybody that is different from what we know as family, extended, nuclear, or blended. Knowing the characteristics of families. We talked about that in lecture. If you look on page, there's a lot of characteristics, and I'm just gonna talk about what it is. The characteristics are, remember we was talking about family as context, family as patient, and family as a system. Remember I was telling you about that. Knowing that families are forever evolving and continually changing. The need for support changes over time. That type of thing. So there's a lot of different things as far as families and stuff like that, where it's important for you to know that when you think of a family, you can't always think of a family as just one thing, okay? Be able to describe characteristics of a client of abuse and know the factors associated with familial violence. Oh, I hate talking about that kind of stuff. It's because it's so sad, because you see different people going through so many different things. But usually when you see somebody like that, that's in some type of setup where they are with somebody that is possibly abusing them, or like really taking them through a bunch of problems, that individual tends to often not really own up to the fact that there may be any abuse occurring. Okay? So, they have like different reasons why oh, did I mention I'm not trying to get off, but I just realized that I think I already told y'all that. That's all right. Social media confidentiality. Okay. Abuse can easily be physical battering, sexual assault, emotional and psychological abuse, and the usage generally escalates over a period of time. So basically that's the things, that's the characteristics, that because it could be physical battering, sexual assault, emotional, psychological. It could be a lot of those things, and it can fall. So be able to pick out the different types of abuse. Look on 620 as I've named here. A lot of things they say contribute to like family violence, and they say stress, poverty, social isolation, psychopathology, and getting that same type of behavior. You know how like people say you need to really change a certain cycle. So learn family behavior. So a person could be kind of off their rockers, psychopathology. They can learn this kind of behavior. I saw my mama get beat by my daddy, so I'm going to do the same thing. Or I saw my father cuss my mama out every day, so I'm going to do that. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they're being abusive because they're used or accustomed to seeing certain things, all the time. You can refer to page 620. But if a person is stressed out, if a person is in poverty, all of those things are things that, if they're socially isolated, which could contribute to violence within the family. So, okay. Not saying that, like, for instance, somebody that's elite wouldn't do it, but they may have a different reason. It may not have to do with the stress of poverty. It might be that there's just been some learned behavior, something that they particularly saw. Okay? And then, of course, once again, we're going to do, you guys are going to have to work out some little milliliter questions and that type of thing. It's really nothing out of ordinary. Micrograms and milligrams to over milliliter type problems. And I think everybody should do pretty good. So everybody have a good evening. I'll try to download this. It takes a minute. And y'all have good night. Bye.